We did not, however, identify evidence that rose to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Because the evidence fell short of that standard, I declined to recommend criminal charges against Mr. Biden.
And welcome back to America Decides. That was special counsel Robert Hur, who was on Capitol Hill today, defending his investigation into President Biden's handling of classified documents. Republicans argued his decision not to indict sets a double standard, while Democrats compared Biden's actions to Donald Trump's. Here was Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin on Trump's conduct.
According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it.
Let's bring Ed O'Keefe at the White House and Nikole Killion on Capitol Hill. And Nikole, I want to start with you where this testimony was. It seemed like Hur was really taking it from both sides. How did Democrats and Republicans lay out their arguments today?
Yeah, well, that's exactly correct. And certainly, as we have seen time and again with these high-profile congressional hearings, they often kind of fall on party lines, and you have members who basically were trying to highlight or cherry-pick aspects of the report that kind of leaned into their political argument. So in the case of many Democrats, they were questioning the special counsel around why he even brought up President Biden's memory, what relevance that was to his ultimate conclusion that he was not going to bring criminal charges against the president. So you had some congressmen like Adam Schiff who said that this was a political choice. You also had other members like Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal who suggested that the special counsel exonerated President Biden, to which the special counsel or former special counsel said that he did not. And then in terms of Republicans, many of them pressed the former special counsel as to why he did not pursue charges against the president. So there was a lot of back and forth. There were videos played both of the current president and the former president as Democrats and Republicans traded political talking points. So per usual, it was a highly contentious hearing. But that being said, former special counsel Robert Hur, continued to hold his ground and really kind of stick to the fundamentals of that report.
And Ed, to you, I mean, today we got to actually see the transcript of the 2 days in which the president sat with Hur. How has the White House been reacting? I know we have just recently heard from the White House counsel's office.
Yeah, look, they released this transcript just hours before the hearing began, and despite Republican pleas that it be done last week. But what it shows us is that, in fact, while Robert Hur may have suggested that the president couldn't recall the date of his son's death, for example, he could recall the month and the day, May 30th. He just couldn't recall the year. It shows us at other times that the president was making clear he didn't know any details about when stuff was packed up and moved to his home in Delaware, suggesting at one point that they just may have dumped stuff in his garage and left it there. He admitted in the transcript as well to being a bit of a pack rat and having too much stuff, and that's part of what was going on, but that otherwise had no details of the decision to move stuff around, which led a lot of Republicans in the hearing today to suggest, well, is he really struggling with his memory, or was he perhaps playing the prosecutor by just claiming that he didn't remember things? Here at the White House, they see this now as a done situation. It's over with. The case is closed. Spokesman Ian Sam spoke with reporters a little while ago and had this to say.
I think today laid bare that the special counsel, who, as you mentioned, was a Trump appointee, made some inappropriate comments about the president and his report that do not match up with the transcript of that interview that now every American can see for themselves.
And on that point about partisan or political motivation, Democrats pointed out today again, Hur confirmed he's a registered Republican. He worked during the Trump administration and with several other key figures at the Justice Department and FBI in the past during Republican administrations. But repeatedly under question, he said there was no political motivation to calling out the president's state of mind. It's that he had to show his work primarily to the attorney general, who was ultimately going to have to make a decision about whether or not to prosecute his boss, the president of the United States. But when Democrats like Adam Schiff and Jamie Raskin turned around and said, you knew exactly what you were doing by putting that in there because you knew this report would be released publicly. Hur insisted, no, I didn't know that for certain. That might be standard practice, but there was no guarantee that the full report was going to be released. Either way, it's now out there. It's for the voters to decide. But in the view of the White House, at least, the case is closed.
And on that, Ed, is the White House looking at the testimony today and looking at how Democrats are positioning themselves as kind of a roadmap for this moving forward, or this is in their rear view?
No, in fact, what you saw a lot of today from Democrats was them throwing back the age and memory questions at Republicans and Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. At least 3 or 4 times they used footage of the former president flubbing lines, unable to mispronounce words like Venezuela, confusing Joe Biden with Barack Obama, and other video proof, so as to suggest if you're concerned about the current president, you probably should also be concerned about the former president. Now, why did they do that, Caitlin? Remember, this hearing aired across several television platforms today, live, uninterrupted, and they saw it as an opportunity to perhaps not only reach independent voters, but even Republican voters and say, if you're concerned about the current president, it's probably your own guy you should be taking a look at. Notably, Republicans did not come with similar video evidence to raise questions, perhaps a missed opportunity for them. But a good example of what the White House, the Biden campaign, and now by extension, Democrats everywhere will continue to do on the age question is say, if you have concerns about us, go take a look at the other guy, too.
And comes on a day that both are expected to clinch their respective party nominations. Right. Nikole, really quickly, another issue on Capitol Hill this week is TikTok. The TikTok CEO was making his rounds on Capitol Hill today, and there's a bill in Congress that will be considered tomorrow. What can you tell us? What's been the reaction?
Well, we do know that the TikTok CEO was in town here in Washington, though not necessarily spotted here around the Hill, but many TikTok creators and influencers were. But of course, this comes ahead of that critical vote tomorrow that's expected in the House on a bipartisan piece of legislation that would require TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, to divest from the social media app, split it off, sever ties in order to prevent it from potentially being prohibited from app stores. We heard from several members of the, House We heard from several members of the House about this legislation following a briefing that they received. And, the conclusion, particularly from the bill's sponsors, is that they felt that the briefing was useful. Whether or not it swayed members in favor or against the legislation, they weren't sure, but they feel confident that there is enough bipartisan support and engagement around this legislation that potentially it can move forward. The bigger issue is if it does clear the House, will the Senate actually take it up? And that's a big question mark because many senators have expressed some reservations about the legislation or might want to take a look at other bills that some of their own members have come up with. So there's still no guarantee that TikTok eventually could potentially be banned. This will still take some time to work through Congress. Caitlin.
All right, something to keep an eye on this week as well as everything else. Ed O'Keefe and Nikole Killion, thank you so much for your time and reporting.